The sea keeps its promises. It remembers the voices of those who once stood watch upon its edge, the men who tended the light, so others might find their way home. The wind remembers, too, how it curved around the cliffside, bending the tall grasses, carrying stories not yet told, and names that the world has long forgotten. Tonight, we return to Eilean Mòr, a small, distant island off the coast of Scotland, where the light burned, but the keepers vanished into the fog, leaving behind only the glow that refused to die. Here, where the Atlantic's grey waters meet the jagged rocks, a single lighthouse has stood for over a century. Its white walls have faded under salt and time, yet its light, quiet, patient, eternal, has never failed those who look for it. It was more than a warning. It was a promise. The story begins in the winter of 1900. 3 men kept the light then: James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur. They lived in the silence between storms, their days measured not by clocks, but by the rhythm of waves against stone. They spoke little. They tended the lamp. They wrote in journals that no one would read. And each night, when the fog pressed in from the sea, they lit the flame that others depended upon. A small sun burning in the endless dark. Then one night, it went out. A passing ship saw nothing where light should have been. Another followed, still no beam. When the rescue boat finally reached the island, the lighthouse door stood open. The beds were neatly made, a single chair was overturned, and the light, impossibly, was burning again. No footprints in the sand, no signs of struggle. Only the silence of an island that seemed to be listening. The sea keeps its promises, but perhaps it asks for something in return. Even now, when the wind passes over Eilean Mòr, some say it carries a sound, a faint rhythm, like a heartbeat under the waves. Maybe it is just the sea remembering. Maybe it is the light keeping its vigil. If you stand there long enough, you might feel it too. The strange tenderness of something that endures. Because to tend to a light that will outlive you is a kind of love that asks for nothing back. And maybe that was the real promise of Eilean Mòr, not to guide others home, but to keep shining even when no one is left to see. No one ever found their footprints, but the light still burns. The ocean carries a rhythm older than memory, a pulse that rises and falls with the shifting of the moon. It has no need for time, it simply is. Standing on the shore of Eilean Mòr, one might feel this too. The endless, unspoken conversation between the land and the sea, a dialogue that stretches beyond lifetimes. There is something sacred in this silence, the kind that comes only when the world remembers nothing but its own breath. The lighthouse that still stands today is not the same one from 1900, though its light burns just as brightly. The structure now is a more modern one, built after the tragedy of the vanished keepers. It is a quiet thing, weathered by the salt and the wind, its base a testament to the persistence of time. The original lighthouse, once a proud symbol of steadfast care, was lost in a storm years ago, and yet in a way, it too still endures. For every time the new light sweeps across the water, it is as though the old one is calling to us, its beam a thread tying us back to something unnameable. It is in this timeless limbo, where the old and the new overlap, that we feel the presence of the keepers. Their faces have long since blurred with the fog, their names faded into the crackling of history. But something remains, something that does not belong solely to the island, nor the keepers, nor even to the people who built the lighthouse that replaced theirs. It is the stillness of devotion, the quiet labour of care given in solitude. And perhaps this is why, on nights when the wind rises and the sea roars against the rocks, we find ourselves still remembering them. Do you hear it? The soft hum of the light as it turns, steady and sure, its beam cutting through the fog, reaching out to touch the water. It is not merely a tool, not simply an instrument of navigation. It is a presence. There is a calm in its persistence, a peace that comes not from what is seen, but from what is always unseen. It does not choose to shine on calm nights when the sea is gentle and still. No, it burns brightest when the fog rolls in, when the storm howls against the cliffs, and the world seems to tremble on the edge of forgetfulness. Perhaps that was the true task of the keepers, not to guide the ships safely, nor even to tend to the light. Perhaps their duty was to remain, to be present through all the quiet and the chaos, and in that presence, they became part of the very land itself. The light that burned through every storm, through every fog, became their promise, to hold the silence, to remain when nothing else could. And what of the silence? What does it speak to us in its solitude? When we walk through life, we are so often distracted, moving from one moment to the next, not listening. Yet sometimes, when the day fades and the night wraps itself around us like a cloak, we find ourselves drawn to the quiet. It is there, in the stillness, that we sense something profound. It is not the absence of sound, no, it is the presence of everything that cannot be named. The quiet is the language of memory, of love that has no voice, of duty that has no end. The keepers may have vanished, their footprints lost to the winds, but the light remembers them, and we too remember them in the silence. Perhaps this is the most lasting of all legacies, not the deeds we do, nor the monuments we leave behind, but the quiet moments that echo after we are gone. Have you ever stood before something that endures, something that feels both ancient and eternal, like the lighthouse standing against the dark horizon? It is not the structure itself that moves us. It is the stillness it represents. The way it waits, like an old friend who knows you better than you know yourself. The way it shines, even when the night feels endless, even when the storm seems ready to swallow the world. And so we drift into this silence, not to search for answers, but to find peace in the remembering. The light keeps its promise, not because it has to, but because it knows that to remember is to give something back, something that endures long after the keepers have gone. Perhaps, in the end, we do not need to know what happened to the men of Eilean Mòr. Perhaps it is enough that they kept their vigil, a silent, unbroken promise that, in the end, is all any of us can offer to the world. There is a peculiar thing about the sky at night, something about its vastness that both comforts and humbles. Perhaps it is in the way the stars seem so far away, yet so impossibly present. Or maybe it is the way the darkness envelops us, as though reminding us that there is no true boundary between ourselves and the cosmos. The sky on Eilean Mòr is often heavy with the weight of this mystery, a quiet, endless dome under which time feels strangely elastic. As if the moments spent here, alone with the elements, could stretch into infinity. To stand on this island at night is to feel both minuscule and infinite at the same time. The sea and sky weave together in an eternal rhythm, drawing all who come to it into their deep, reflective embrace. This was the world the keepers knew, not the world of clocks and calendars, but the world of breath and ebb and flow, where the only measure of time was the turning of the tide and the changing of the light. We have no way of knowing what thoughts passed through the minds of James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur as they looked out over the water hour after hour, their gaze drawn to the same stretch of dark horizon. The sea never changes, and yet, each night it offers something new. The way the moon casts shadows on the waves, or the way the mist curls around the cliffs, bending the landscape into strange, familiar shapes. And in that endless repetition, in that soft rhythm of waiting, we may glimpse a truth about devotion, about the nature of love. To devote oneself to something so constant, so unyielding, must require a certain understanding of impermanence. For nothing stays the same, not even the sea. The light, though steady, was not eternal. The keepers knew this. The fog that enveloped their small world, the winds that howled and rattled the windows of their stone tower, were all reminders that even the most steadfast of promises must eventually dissolve. Perhaps this is why their vigil, their care, feels so profoundly human. They did not keep the light burning because they believed it would never go out. They kept it burning because they understood that, like them, it too was bound to the fleeting, fragile nature of life. And so we return to the question of why we remember them, why the keepers of Eilean Mòr have not been forgotten. It is not because they solved the mystery of the sea, or because they defeated the inevitable passage of time. It is because, in their silence, they became something more than themselves. In their stillness, they showed us that devotion, in its truest form, is not about permanence or control, but about the willingness to offer what we have, even if it is only for a moment. The wind carries their names across the island, through the cracks in the lighthouse's walls and into the moss-covered stone. It is the same wind that bends the trees and whispers in the ear of anyone who stands quietly enough to listen. On still nights, when the light turns on and the sky stretches endlessly above, it seems as though everything, the earth, the sea, the air, holds its breath, waiting. Perhaps waiting for us to remember that the keepers did not vanish. They simply became part of something larger. A promise kept, not with grand gestures, but with quiet endurance. It is a strange thing to feel both lost and found in the same moment. The keepers' disappearance, their quiet departure from the island, speaks to something we all experience: the impermanence of our lives, the way we leave marks on the world, only for time to erase them. Yet, in that very erasure, there is also an answer. Perhaps it is not the physical traces we leave behind that matter most, but the way in which our absence lingers, like the echo of a song long after the final note has faded. There is a passage from the world of the living to the world of memory, where we continue to burn, like a light that will never extinguish. And so, in their absence, the keepers remain, still tending the light through the fog, still holding their silent vigil. Perhaps that is the lesson we need to learn, that we are never truly gone as long as we are remembered, and that memory, in its own quiet way, is a form of devotion that endures. The silence, heavy as it is, does not speak of endings. It speaks of continuations, of how we keep walking, even when we cannot see the road ahead. It is the same silence that the keepers faced each night, standing together in their isolation, bound by the light. And though they are no longer there, perhaps their presence remains in the steady beam that stretches across the water, in the very air we breathe, in the wind that bends the grass beneath our feet. There is a peculiar stillness to the world when the wind dies, when the waves calm, and the sky itself seems to pause, holding its breath. In that silence, the lighthouse stands as though waiting for something, its beam cutting through the fog, its light reflecting off the rippling water. The world is empty, yet full. A place where everything that has been is quietly held in balance, as though it exists within the fragile space between memory and eternity. On nights like these, when the air is thick with salt and the only sound is the distant murmur of the sea, one might imagine the keepers standing on the cliffs, gazing out into the darkness. What did they see in those long hours of solitude? What did they feel as the light turned and swept its beam over the water, night after night, year after year? They were not alone, not truly. They were surrounded by the rhythm of the earth, the ocean, the sky. But there was no voice to answer their thoughts, only the wind and the sea and the lighthouse light that kept its endless promise. Perhaps that was the nature of their devotion, not to seek answers, but to simply be present. There is something deeply humbling about the idea of living for something so constant, something so unchanging as the light, and yet so fleeting as the moments spent watching it burn. In their care, in their quiet dedication, the keepers did not try to control the world around them. They simply accepted it, with all its storms, its fog, its fleeting beauty. And in that acceptance, they became part of something much greater than themselves, something vast, enduring, and unknowable. The light itself is a symbol of this paradox. It is both a guiding force and a fading presence. It burns brightly, cutting through the darkness, but it is not eternal. It flickers, sometimes struggling against the winds, the rain, the salt that cakes its glass. And yet, it always returns. Each time it fades, it rises again, steady and sure, reminding us that even in the darkest moments, there is something that persists, something that remains, even when we feel as though everything is slipping away. On nights when the fog rolls in thick and heavy, it is easy to forget that the light is there at all. But the lighthouse does not vanish with the mist. It stands, its beam cutting through the unseen steady and true, as if to say, I am here. I have always been here. It is a small, unspoken promise that endures, no matter the storm, no matter the silence that surrounds it. And so too does the memory of the keepers endure. Their names may have faded from the records, their faces lost to time. But the light remembers them. The sea remembers them. The air that moves through the island remembers them. There is a quiet endurance in this, a kind of grace in the way they continue to be present, even in their absence. The keepers, in their devotion, have become part of the fabric of the island itself, their lives woven into the very earth and, see, their souls carried in the steady turning of the lighthouse beam. Isn't that the nature of all things? That we too will fade, as all things must, but that our presence lingers in the quiet spaces of the world we leave behind. The keeper's disappearance was not an end, but a transition, a moving from the world of the living to the world of memory, where their devotion remains, unbroken, unyielding, like the light that never stops turning. They did not vanish, not really. They became the light. In this way, the island is not empty. It is full of the quiet voices of those who tended the light, full of the echoes of their lives, their work, their love. And though we cannot see them, though we cannot touch them, we can feel them in the silence of the wind, in the sweep of the light across the water, in the way the fog shifts and turns with the tide. They are there, as surely as the lighthouse itself is there, a presence, an echo, a promise that never fades. Perhaps that is the greatest truth of all, that what we do, what we offer to the world, does not vanish. It lingers, like the soft murmur of the sea, like the light that cuts through the fog. In our devotion, in our love, we become part of the world in ways we cannot yet understand. And even when we are no longer here, we remain in the things we left behind. The light that never died, the silence that never ceased, the promise that continues to burn through every storm. And so, as the wind rises again and the fog rolls over the cliffs, we return to the same question we have asked all along. What does it mean to be remembered? Is it the name we leave behind? Or is it the way we touch the world with our presence, however briefly? Perhaps it is both. Perhaps it is something more. In the end, the keepers of Eilean Mòr remind us of the quiet power of devotion, of the light that burns through the darkness, not because it is needed, but because it chooses to. And in that choosing, in that quiet persistence, there is something eternal. The light keeps its promise. It always has. In the quiet, when the night is still and the air holds its breath, there are moments when the line between the past and present feels as thin as a thread of mist, drifting just above the water. On Eilean Mòr, the lighthouse beam cuts through that delicate thread, a steady reminder that time, though ever moving, carries within it echoes that never fully fade. The sea, the wind, the island itself, all are witnesses to the lives of those who came before, their spirits woven into the very fabric of the place, like threads in an old, forgotten tapestry. The lighthouse is not simply a building, it is a guardian of memory. Those who tended it, those who kept the light alive against the endless pull of darkness, have left more than their names in its walls. They have left a quiet, invisible presence, a presence that lingers long after their physical forms have passed. It is in the way the light shines each night, unwavering, though the keepers themselves are no longer there to tend it. It is in the soft murmur of the waves against the cliffs, the gentle rustle of the grass beneath the wind, and the stillness that settles over the island when the world grows dark. What do we do with memory? It is something we carry with us, isn't it? Like a small stone in our pocket, smooth and cool, always there, sometimes forgotten, sometimes held close. The keepers of Eilean Mòr, though they vanished so long ago, live on in the memory of their care, in the light that never stopped burning. It is a gentle thing, this kind of remembrance. Not loud, not insistent, just a quiet presence that refuses to fade, no matter how many years have passed. When we stand on the shore of Eilean Mòr, or on any shore that is touched by the sea, we are standing at the edge of time. The waves that lap against the rocks carry with them the weight of centuries. They are not just water, but time itself, a force that both erases and preserves. Every ripple, every gust of wind is a reminder that the past is not gone. It is woven into the world around us, hidden in the quiet corners, in the spaces between the sounds of the present. The lighthouse beam is part of that quiet. It cuts through the night, not to illuminate the world, but to illuminate what was. The keepers, the lives they lived, the promises they made. And so, in this way, the light becomes a metaphor. It is not merely a beam of illumination, but a thread that connects the present with the past, that reaches out from the depths of time and brings us into its quiet embrace. The light, though steady, is not static. It moves, it turns, it pulses like a heartbeat that spans the years, connecting us to something larger than ourselves. Perhaps this is what devotion means, to offer something that will outlive us, that will continue long after we have faded into memory. It is a kind of love, quiet and constant, that persists even in absence. There is no need for grand monuments, no need for statues or plaques to remember the keepers. The light remembers them. The island remembers them. And perhaps that is all we need. In the stillness of the night, when the wind rises and the sea hums its ancient song, we are reminded of the impermanence of all things. The keepers, too, were impermanent. Their lives were but a brief moment in the long expanse of time, and yet, in that moment, they gave everything. They gave their presence, their devotion, their love. And in doing so, they became part of something eternal. What is it that we leave behind when we go? What is it that remains when our footprints have been washed away by the tide? Perhaps it is not the things we make, but the way we touch the world, the way we offer something of ourselves to the vast, endless expanse of time. It is in the quiet gestures, the small acts of devotion that we find our place in the world. And in that place, we become part of something larger than ourselves, something that will continue to burn long after we are gone. Perhaps that is the greatest gift we can give, to remain, not through monuments, but through memory, to leave behind a light that will never go out, even in the darkest moments, even in the deepest fog. A light that continues to guide those who come after us, just as it once guided us. The keepers of Eilean Mòr did not vanish. They became the light, and in that transformation, they taught us that even the smallest act of devotion can ripple through time, leaving a presence that cannot be erased. Their light still burns, as steady as ever, as bright as ever, cutting through the fog and carrying with it the whispers of a promise kept. And so, in the stillness, when the waves wash against the shore and the lighthouse beam sweeps across the water, we can hear them in the quiet, in the light. They have not gone. They are still here, as present as the sea, as constant as the turning of the world. In the quiet spaces of the world, between the breath of the wind and the sway of the sea, there are moments when the past and present do not feel separate at all. They fold into each other like the waves that roll onto the shore, one merging into the other endlessly. If you listen carefully, perhaps you can hear it, the faintest echo of lives lived long ago, moving through the water, drifting in the air, as though the world itself remembers what has come before. Eilean Mòr, with its rugged cliffs and salt-kissed air, holds within its bones the rhythm of time. The land and sea have never been strangers to one another, each shaping the other in a dance that has lasted far longer than any human memory. The lighthouse, standing resolute against the winds and the storms, is not just a beacon for ships, but a sentinel for all who pass by. A reminder that some things endure, even as all else changes. It is a place where the past does not sit apart from the present. It lingers, like the scent of the sea, or the feel of the wind on your skin. Even when the lighthouse is empty, even when the light flickers out, the island remembers. And in remembering, it calls us back to the quiet, to the stillness that holds the essence of those who once tended it. The keepers, long gone, have become part of the landscape, not as figures that once were, but as forces that still are. Their lives were bound to this place, as though the island itself called to them. It was not simply the duty of tending the light that kept them here. It was the way the land and the sea wrapped themselves around them, offering a kind of shelter that was both comforting and isolating. There is a particular kind of peace that comes with solitude on an island, a peace that comes not from being alone, but from being surrounded by something larger than oneself. The waves never cease. The wind never rests. And in the absence of voices, there is a quiet dialogue between the earth and the sky. Perhaps that is what the keepers discovered in their time there. In the space between the constant noise of the world and the stillness of the island, they found something essential. Not just the act of keeping watch, not just the act of keeping the light burning, but the act of being present. And in that presence, they became one with the land, part of the land's rhythm, part of the land's memory. Their quiet devotion, in the end, was a return to something deeper, something more ancient than any of us can fully grasp. The lighthouse beam, turning with the rhythm of time, is a symbol of this return. Each time it cuts through the darkness, it brings us back to the beginning. The light, in all its quiet persistence, is not merely a tool to guide ships. It is a keeper of memory. It is a signpost pointing towards something greater, something enduring, something that exists in the space between the waves and the wind, between the living and the lost. Perhaps it is the eternal nature of the tide that speaks most clearly of all. The tide returns again and again, as though it is never truly gone. It is the heartbeat of the earth, the pulse that sustains us, even when we cannot see it. The ebb and flow are steady, constant, and though the waters may seem to pull back at times, they always return. In this, there is comfort. The tide, like the memory of the keepers, does not forget. It only pauses, only shifts, only waits for the right moment to come back, to touch the shore once more. The keepers, in their quiet watch, understood something about this rhythm. They understood that their duty was not to force time to stop, but to live within its rhythm. Their light was not meant to last forever. It was meant to be steady, to be true, to be unwavering when all else was uncertain. It was a beacon for others, yes, but it was also a beacon for themselves. A reminder that even in the most isolated corners of the world, there is something to hold on to. Something that will guide us back when the fog rolls in, when the night seems endless. As we stand on the shore now, watching the waves turn and return, we feel the pull of that rhythm. The past and present are not so far apart after all. The tide knows this, the sea knows this, and perhaps, in our own quiet moments of reflection, we come to know it too. What we leave behind does not vanish. It simply becomes part of the rhythm of the world. Like the tide, it returns, it ebbs, it flows, and in this return, we find a kind of peace, a kind of home. So, as the light turns once again, as it sweeps its beam across the waters, we can feel the presence of those who tended it, those who waited in the silence. Their devotion has not vanished. It is here, still, in the wind, in the waves, in the very air that we breathe. And as long as the light continues to turn, as long as the tide continues to return, so too does the memory of the keepers. Their presence undiminished by time, their promise kept. And perhaps this too is the greatest comfort of all, that nothing is ever truly lost. It only waits to return, again and again, like the tide, like the light, like the memory that lives in the silence. There is a peculiar sense of peace in the moments when the world slows down. The waves that lap at the shore lose their urgency. The wind dies to a whisper, and the light, though still turning, seems to pause for a brief moment, as if it too is taking a deep breath. These are the moments when time feels more like a memory than a forward motion. They are the moments that stretch out into eternity, where everything that has passed, all the lives, all the losses, all the acts of devotion, are quietly held in the embrace of the present. On Eilean Mòr, there are nights when the lighthouse beam seems to hold the world in its gaze, as though it is not simply guiding the ships at sea, but holding space for all that has been. The island, though weathered by the salt and the wind, still carries the marks of the keepers, not in the tangible sense, not in the worn stone of the lighthouse or the faded walls of the keepers' cottages, but in the quiet spaces where the past lingers like a soft hum in the air. It is in the way the light turns. It is in the way the wind moves through the tall grass, bending it in a familiar rhythm. It is in the way the sea whispers against the rocks, a gentle, constant murmur that carries the weight of time. These are the things the keepers knew, the way the world does not forget, even when we are no longer here to witness it. The way, in their quiet devotion, they became part of something larger than themselves, something vast and eternal, like the ocean that stretches beyond the horizon. And in this quiet, in this stillness, there is something sacred. The keepers may have left the island, their bodies swallowed by time and tide, but their devotion, their quiet, steadfast care, remains. It lives on in the light, in the waves, in the very air that moves around us. It is in this devotion that the island becomes a place of memory, not just of the keepers, but of all those who have ever loved, who have ever given their time, their lives, to something greater than themselves. In this place, devotion is not measured by the years lived, or by the monuments built, but by the quiet, unwavering persistence of love that continues to burn, even when we are gone. Perhaps in the end, that is what the keepers understood most clearly. They did not keep the light burning because they believed it would last forever. They kept it burning because in its quiet glow, they knew they were part of something that did not end with them. The light was not theirs to control, not theirs to hold. It was a gift, a quiet offering to the world, a promise that even in the darkest moments, there would be something to guide us home. And so, even now, even as time moves on, the light continues to turn. It sweeps across the water, cutting through the fog, carrying with it the memory of those who once stood watch. In the stillness of the night, when the wind settles and the sea seems to sleep, we feel their presence once more. It is not a loud presence, not one that demands our attention, but a quiet, unspoken feeling, like the soft hum of the lighthouse, like the steady pull of the tide. It is the presence of something enduring, something that continues, long after the moments have passed. There is a comfort in this, a reminder that, though we may not always see it, though we may not always feel it, there is always something larger than ourselves holding us steady. The keepers, though they have disappeared into time, have not truly left. They have become part of the rhythm of the world, like the sea, like the wind, like the light. They continue to guide, to watch, to be present in their own quiet way, and in this we find our peace. We are not alone. The light still burns, the tide still returns, and in the silence between, we remember. We remember that we too are part of something larger, something that will carry us long after we have gone. We are part of the rhythm, part of the memory, part of the devotion that continues, long after the days have passed. In the stillness of the night, as the lighthouse beam sweeps across the water, we are reminded that some promises are not meant to be broken. They are meant to be carried like the tide, always returning, always moving, always waiting for us to remember. There are places where the boundary between worlds feels thinner, where the past presses gently against the present, and memory becomes a kind of weather drifting through the air. Eilean Mòr is such a place, when the mist curls low around the rocks and the sea falls into a deep hush. It seems as though time itself begins to soften. The lighthouse stands at the heart of it all, the one constant against the slow dissolving of years. Its beam moves like a slow breath, steady, patient, unending, and in its rhythm we feel the quiet persistence of everything that once was. Each turn of the light is an act of remembrance, each sweep across the sea a renewal of the promise the keepers made long ago, that the light would not fail. The keepers themselves are long gone, their disappearance still unanswered after more than a century, but the light, their light, continues. That is how the world remembers them. Not through the words in books or the carved letters on a stone, but through a steady glow that touches the horizon, even now. Perhaps that is the most honest kind of immortality, not one that demands recognition, but one that endures in silence. When the supply ship Hesperus arrived on December 26, 1900, Captain Harvey found the island strangely quiet. The gates were closed. The clocks had stopped. A chair was overturned beside the kitchen table, as if someone had stood up suddenly. The keepers' oilskins were missing, all but one. The west landing was damaged by storm, ropes torn from their fastenings, iron railings bent. But there were no footprints, no sign of struggle, just the endless sound of the wind and the sea, indifferent, eternal. The report that followed was factual, practical, a careful accounting of what was seen. Yet even in those measured words, one can feel something else. The echo of bewilderment, the faint tremor of grief. The investigators could record only what they found. What they could not record was the feeling of absence, the way the air itself seemed to remember the men who were no longer there, the way the silence pressed in, heavy, unbroken, the way the light, though lit again by others, seemed to burn with a different tone, quieter, softer, like a sigh. It is strange how easily we forget that duty can be a kind of prayer. The keepers, in their solitude, lived by ritual, tending the flame, recording the weather, winding the clockwork, watching the horizon. They gave shape to time through their small, patient acts. Each night was the same, yet each was different. The storm's mood shifted. The sea spoke in new tones. In that repetition, they found meaning, not in what they accomplished, but in what they maintained. Theirs was not a life of triumph, but of continuity. And perhaps in that quiet continuity, they reached something close to grace. Now, standing in their place, you can still feel the weight of that ritual in the air. The stairs worn smooth by footsteps, the brass fittings dulled by countless hands, the faint smell of oil that lingers like memory. Even the silence feels shaped by use, as if the island itself has learned to listen. The waves roll, the gulls cry, and yet there is something beyond sound, a listening presence, patient and kind. Perhaps it is the keepers themselves, or perhaps it is the echo of their care, woven into the wind. We often think of hauntings as the restless remains of the past, unfinished stories clinging to the present. But what if a haunting is not unrest, but devotion? What if it is not the refusal to let go, but the promise to remain? The light of Eilean Mòr does not flicker to frighten. It shines because it remembers. Because even after all this time, there is still someone to guide, still a promise to keep. The sea moves endlessly around the island, a vast, shifting mirror. It reflects not only the light, but the soul of the world, its patience, its sorrow, its beauty. Watching it, you might begin to understand that nothing truly ends. Everything simply changes form, flowing into something new. The keepers are not gone. They have simply become part of the rhythm, the light, the sea, the silence that cradles the island. And as the beam turns once more across the dark, there is a moment, brief but unmistakable, when the whole world seems to hold its breath. The light passes over the sea, touches the horizon, and returns. In that turning, we are reminded, nothing is ever lost. What we love, what we tend, what we remember, it all remains in the light between worlds. There is a point just before dawn when the world feels suspended, a breath between darkness and day. The sea lies still, holding the reflection of the lighthouse beam as if reluctant to let it go. The air is cold, damp with the salt of 1,000 tides, and the island seems to dream. It is in this fragile hour that the past feels closest, not as a story retold, but as a quiet companionship. The light turns, and somewhere in its rhythm, time itself begins again. In that turning, the island remembers. The stones remember footsteps. The windows remember the breath of those who looked out to sea. The metal remembers the hands that polished it, the tools that tightened the bolts against the storm. Memory does not fade here, it simply changes shape. It becomes wind, becomes water, becomes the quiet hum that lingers in the air long after the ships have gone. The mystery of the keepers has never been solved, and perhaps it never should be. There is mercy in the unknown, a gentleness that allows us to imagine peace instead of loss. The official report spoke of storms and waves and duty, but nature keeps her own secrets. Perhaps the men did not fall to violence or despair. Perhaps, in the final light of day, they simply walked into the wind, hearing something beyond the reach of language, something that called them home. Sometimes, when the fog curls close and the light sweeps through its gauze, it feels as though the island itself is breathing with them. The air thickens, not with fear, but with tenderness, the tenderness of memory that refuses to vanish. There is no haunting here, only a kind of remembering that hums through the stones like an old hymn. The light moves, and for a moment you might almost see them, not as ghosts, but as presence, not as loss, but as care continuing. It is strange how devotion survives its keeper. The light burns long after the hands that tended it have gone. It burns not from habit, but from inheritance. Every keeper since that winter has watched the sea with the same quiet reverence. Everyone has wound the mechanism, trimmed the wick, cleaned the lens. And in each small act, they have touched something ancient. In tending the light, they tend the memory. They keep the promise. And so the lighthouse stands, not as a monument, but as a living rhythm. The beam turns, the tide returns, and the silence between them grows deeper. The sea, vast and eternal, bears no witness to what it takes, yet it holds everything, all the same. Every echo, every name, every unspoken word. It does not grieve, it remembers. When the first blush of dawn reaches the horizon, the beam begins to fade. Its light grows softer, dissolving into the pale gold of morning. The island stirs, not awake exactly, but gently returned to the world of days. And still, the memory remains. For what is light, if not a way of remembering the dark without fearing it? The keeper's story is no longer a question to be solved. It is a quiet truth that lives in the turning of the light, in the patience of the sea. They did not vanish, they transformed. Their care became a current, their silence a song. The world turns, and the light turns with it. And somewhere, beneath the surface of time, the keepers turn too, not gone, but moving endlessly in the rhythm of devotion. Morning on Eilean Mòr comes quietly. The sea, having murmured through the long night, softens into glass. Gulls rise in slow spirals, their cries distant and pale. The wind has grown gentle now, carrying the faint scent of salt and heather across the island's spine. The lighthouse stands still in its vigil, no longer casting its beam but resting, as though the world itself has exhaled. In this hour, there is peace, not because the questions have been answered, but because they no longer need to be. The mystery remains, but it no longer feels heavy. It feels natural, like mist that belongs to the sea. The keeper's absence, once so sharp in the minds of those who searched for them, has softened into something else. Not tragedy, but transformation. They are part of the tide now, part of the quiet movement that shapes the world without ever needing to be seen. Every story that endures does so because it holds a truth too large for certainty. The story of the keepers is not about disappearance, it is about presence, the kind that lingers even when form is gone. They did their work, as all devoted souls do, not for glory, not for recognition, but because the light had to stay lit. They gave themselves to that purpose, and the sea took them into its keeping. The light turns still. It burns through storm and silence alike, its glow a memory written into the horizon. To watch it now is to feel the rhythm of something older than human time, the breath of devotion that does not end when life does. In this way, the keeper's promise was not lost at all. It was fulfilled. We too are keepers in our own quiet ways, tending to what must endure, even when no one is watching. We keep love alive in small gestures. We tend the flame of memory, the fragile glow of care. We walk through the fog, not because we expect to see clearly, but because we trust that somewhere a light waits for us to return. And so the story closes, not with an ending, but with a continuation, a long, slow turning of the beam over water. The sea remembers, the light endures. The silence, once heavy with loss, now feels like understanding. No one ever found their footprints, yet the light kept its vigil through every storm. Perhaps that was their answer. Not vanishing, but becoming the glow that never left. The sea remembered, and so shall we. The sea keeps its promises. It remembers the voices of those who once stood watch upon its edge, the men who tended the light, so others might find their way home. The wind remembers, too, how it curved around the cliffside, bending the tall grasses, carrying stories not yet told, and names that the world has long forgotten. Tonight, we return to Eilean Mòr, a small, distant island off the coast of Scotland, where the light burned, but the keepers vanished into the fog, leaving behind only the glow that refused to die. Here, where the Atlantic's grey waters meet the jagged rocks, a single lighthouse has stood for over a century. Its white walls have faded under salt and time, yet its light, quiet, patient, eternal, has never failed those who look for it. It was more than a warning. It was a promise. The story begins in the winter of 1900. 3 men kept the light then: James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur. They lived in the silence between storms, their days measured not by clocks, but by the rhythm of waves against stone. They spoke little. They tended the lamp. They wrote in journals that no one would read. And each night, when the fog pressed in from the sea, they lit the flame that others depended upon. A small sun burning in the endless dark. Then one night, it went out. A passing ship saw nothing where light should have been. Another followed, still no beam. When the rescue boat finally reached the island, the lighthouse door stood open. The beds were neatly made, a single chair was overturned, and the light, impossibly, was burning again. No footprints in the sand, no signs of struggle. Only the silence of an island that seemed to be listening. The sea keeps its promises, but perhaps it asks for something in return. Even now, when the wind passes over Eilean Mòr, some say it carries a sound, a faint rhythm, like a heartbeat under the waves. Maybe it is just the sea remembering. Maybe it is the light keeping its vigil. If you stand there long enough, you might feel it too. The strange tenderness of something that endures. Because to tend to a light that will outlive you is a kind of love that asks for nothing back. And maybe that was the real promise of Eilean Mòr. Not to guide others home, but to keep shining even when no one is left to see. No one ever found their footprints, but the light still burns.